It's simply magic. Young people to me. Magic people to me. Well, lift your hands up high, let your voices cry. You're proud to be my lead. You're simply magic. Young people to me. Magic people to me. Well, lift your hands up high, let your voices cry. You're proud to be my lead. Well, now in this crazy old world we're living today, now it's shit to gamble and say, when they don't care about the people, just blowing people away. And I wonder inside, with the future on mine, I turn to the apple today. I say, come on, kid, come on, give it a try. You should ask away. You get away in our hands, the one I get to away. No matter what you know, I do now. If I got to get out of here, I come to the door, not out of time. And oh, I'm going to off the door. Dia mau dia buburi dia mana bunga jubuna because you're magic young people to me you're magic people to me well if you hit that line let your voices cry you're back to be Maori Maori Maori
Kia ora. That's a way I found randomly on Facebook. So I've listened to this kuia before, and it's another version of your magic. Proud to be Maori. Anyway, kia ora, kia ora. It's been a while, hasn't it? Holy hecka. It's been, feels like forever that I've been able to come on here. You know, I've all been busy. It's not that I've been doing nothing. And it's all over. Crikey. What an event running for local government was. So before we get on to more important kaupapa, and I want to share a video of Neil Oliver that he did the other day. And there's more and more evidence coming out, right? Firstly, I just want to acknowledge my mama. So you saw I put up a little clip there in regards to 80. What a milestone. And, you know, it was such a happy but very, very sad occasion because Dad's only been gone 3 months and it only feels like yesterday. You know, the mumma is still very raw in our hearts. We've still got a long way to go for the healing, and probably more me than anyone else, as I understand. I think more than my own whānau, you know, exactly what Dad has been through. I'm on a Facebook page, and it's all the ones that have been vaccine injured and those that have died from vaccine injuries. And I tell you, time and time and time again, Dad's story comes up where he ends up in, or you know, a similar story. And I'm thinking, this is what I'm thinking, because I you know, hand on heart, it's a trauma. So I'm carrying a trauma in regards to what happened to Dad. And this particular Facebook page, a lot of whānau are carrying trauma, and you know, like how you have AA, like Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm thinking that we need to set up something very similar for those of us that that are dealing with whānau, or themselves that are vaccine injured, and those that have lost whānau to vaccine injury, because the trauma is real. How you deal with it individually, and this, I forgot the name of the actual site, but it's a site where someone shared it with me and invited me onto that page, and I'm really pleased that they did. And I go on there often, and sometimes you revisit your own trauma, right? Because what's happened to Dad is traumatic, and even though we celebrated Mum's 80th, which is a milestone in itself, we still carry the trauma of what happened to Dad. And the common theme that came out of that particular Facebook page is one that they were diagnosed, or family were aware that themselves or their whānau member was vaccine injured, how the doctors in the hospital and the nurses try to cover that up, how they in the end had no choice but to accept that you or the whānau member was vaccine injured. And once the hospitals accepted that, how we were treated differently, and basically they wanted to get us off their books. We didn't get the proper treatment, or the whānau member didn't get the proper treatment that they deserved, and basically we got ignored. We got second. We were basically treated as second-class citizens. With Dad, it was okay because I ensured if they didn't look after him, I was there in hospital, and I made sure he got the best care. But not everyone were able to receive that care, and a lot of them, which saddens me. And actually, I cried reading some of these stories, and even said, "You're telling my father's story." The irony, is that people across the country are sharing the same story. So I'm grateful to that page, and the same story is that a lot of them ended up taking their family member home, where they died at home, surrounded by whānau, because they weren't getting the actual care that they deserved and they were entitled to. So there's a lack of trust when it comes to authorities and systems, right? We've seen it in the judiciary. We've seen it across the board, how whole worlds and our whole systems have been turned upside down, and now there seems to be a lack of accountability. Here's the thing. The only way you can get away with murder without being held accountable for it is by being a politician, and we need to change that. If there's a decision that you made as a politician that killed people, then we as the public should be able to hold that politician accountable, and that might make them question some of the decisions that they make, because there is zero accountability. There is no one that is being held accountable for my father's death. Zero, zilch. And all the other whānau that have lost their lives, right? And that's the first point. So I was wanting to I sort of jumped the gun a bit, because I wanted to analyse what's happened to me in local government. It was a tight race, so I lost by 41 votes. 41 votes. But here's the kicker, and this is important more from me as an educator, from me from a Māori development perspective, from me as an advocate for my Māori community. And part of the reason why I chose to run for mayor was not to win the mayoral race, because really it was a 2-horse race. That's the reality. Coming fourth out of 8 in the mayoral race wasn't too bad, actually, considering I wasn't in it to win. I was in it to highlight and to put some very important issues on the table. One was the housing crisis that we're in. Apparently, the government doesn't believe we're in the housing crisis. Crikey, that reminds me of another previous government who says there was no poverty issues. I mean, they go into denial, right? And we in the community know that's a fallacy. So anyway, so I highlighted and put on the table the housing crisis. I also, because we heard about we have a beautiful city, Hamilton City, and it is a beautiful city. Been living there for over 25 years, living in Norton, or Noema as we know it, for nearly 20 years, and so know that place from the back of my hand, right? And I also know, my sons moved into the wealthiest place in town, which is Rotatuna. Just bought them a spanking brand new $1 million, not even a mansion, whānau, it's just a 4-bedroom house to house his babies, right? To house his children. And over there, they have a spanking brand new sporting arena. They're getting a brand new library. It's just, millions and millions and millions of dollars is thrown into the leafiest suburb in Hamilton. And where I've been living in Norton for 20 years, zilch, zero investment. In actual fact, my argument was you decommissioned our park, and then you wonder why our babies, I'm not justifying it, but they've got to understand the psychology. You take away our parks, you decommission our parks, you wonder why the kids go over to the neighboring parks, the very flash neighboring parks, and vandalize those parks, because you're sending a message to these children in my community that you don't care about them. So those were the issues that I was putting on the table about equity and housing, with my main two ones, and the fact that I'm a fearless leader, and it's I'll put the very difficult issues on the table that no one wants to talk about. So that was my campaign around running for mayor. Now, what happened? And plus, I was also a Māori ward candidate as well. Now, so I lost by 41 votes, and there were 73 votes. Basically, that in the so you had the prelims. 31 votes were lost because apparently people scribbled on their forms, and the electoral officers could not read or understand the votes, right? Apparently. So 31 votes were lost there. Then and this is just an analysis so that we can sort this out, because voting is cumbersome. It's the lowest turnout ever, and we need to do it better, because democracy is under threat. And I don't trust systems and authority at the moment, especially over the last 2 years. So I'm a real cynic, right? I'm a real cynic, and as soon as results come out and I see issues, then I'm straight on my email, and boom, I start asking the Electoral Commission or the electoral officer some very technical questions, actually. Because what I don't want to do is take the buggers to court. Why? Because it'll cost me $1,000. That's why, and I've already invested a lot of time and money in a campaign, and I don't want to waste it. But there are glaring issues. So there was reasons why I ran for mayor, and like I said, it wasn't to run the mayoral race. It was to put some very important issues on the table, to highlight those issues, and give it a high profile, and it worked. And now the two Māori that are elected, they know that issue is an important issue. So the campaign has already been done in regards to that space, right? Now, 31 votes were lost or disallowed, as they have stated in the preliminaries, which was last Saturday. Then the special votes had to be counted, and what came back is that there were 73 blank votes. So 73 plus 31, that's 104 votes, right? And so the question I got onto, and this is where my legal brain kicks in, and so I asked the question, what is a blank vote? How do you identify a blank vote? and who misses out on those blank votes. So it came back to me that, and this is the official response, is that so you've got, this is the pamphlet that we receive, right? And you've got the profiles of all the candidates, and in the front you'll have the mayoral candidates where I sat. So I sat in the front of this booklet as a mayoral candidate. Where am I? So that's me there, if you can see. And then I sat near the back as a Māori ward candidate, and there I am there, right? So that's at the back of our quite a thick pamphlet. So we had 44 candidates run across as mayor in Ham East, Ham West, and Kirikiriro Māori wards, and we were all squeezed into this quite a substantive booklet. So that's all very well. What happened to me, so yes, I lost by 41 votes, but there's a technicality, right? And what came back to me from the electoral officers, and I'm sure I'll have more comms tomorrow as well, but I was grateful that they responded to me on a Saturday, because I'm sure that they would be at home. But anyway, so the final results come out, and so I asked the question. So what happened is people would have seen me on as mayor in the front of the booklet, and then on the voting form, they would have voted for me as mayor, but they left the Māori ward section of it as a candidate blank. So the assumption is that they thought that they were voting for me in the Māori ward because they would have seen the picture and just put number 1 next to it, and that's why they're called blank votes, which was really fascinating. And it made me realize that when you're campaigning, and especially if you're campaigning in 2 positions, you've got to be very, very clear that there are 2 positions, because 73 votes were lost. So even though I lost by 41 votes, technically you could argue that had they had realised that they only voted for me as mayor and didn't vote for me as a Māori ward candidate, I potentially could have won my seat. So what that highlighted to me was how, especially for our own people, you've got to keep it as simple as possible and make sure that there's no confusing messages. So arguably, I could argue just with myself, basically, and my campaign team, that if I just ran for the Māori ward, I potentially could have got in, because there would have been no confusion. They would only have had to vote for me once. Whereas because I ran for the mayor as well as the Māori ward, they still only voted for me once. Interesting, but that still highlights how cumbersome our voting process is. Now, the other issue we had, and my son said, my son holds several degrees. I mean, he's got trades and he's got degrees. So he's a very, very clever boy, my eldest son, and his partner as well. 2 highly intelligent adults. And so they had their teenage children, their young children around the table to fill out. They did special votes, right? And the reason why they had to do special votes is because their voting papers went to the old address and they'd moved into their new address, so they had to get special votes done. And my son rang me up and he said, "Holy moly, Mum," he said, "honestly, you need a degree to figure this out." He said the moko said if their nan wasn't running, they wouldn't bother. It was that cumbersome. Here's the other issue, and I will bring it up with the Electoral Commission. which my son said was super confusing, and that's why I'm wondering if there were some disallowed votes because of the confusion. So remember, there's 104 votes that have gone that were disallowed. Technically, I had lost by 41. Technically, potentially, I could have won by 60 something votes if these issues weren't there. But they're good learning, and we've got to take the learning from all of this, and we've got to understand the system and how the system is still failing, basically. So my mokopuna said it was too cumbersome, that they got hoha trying to fill it out, and they said if they vote, they said voting online will ensure a lot of young ones vote, and simplifying the process will also ensure that people vote. So highlighting the really low turnout. And what's interesting is the freedom fighters got blamed for that. So the Disinformation Project, Dr. What's his name? Huatawa or whatever, however you pronounce his name. Sorry if I've mispronounced his name wrong. Has argued that the reason why there's been a low turnout is because of the conspiracy, disinformation, misinformation. People had hijacked the democratic process. And what he forgets, it is a democracy, and everyone's entitled to a vote. Whether you like what that person says or not, let the people decide. Let the people decide. However, in my case, it's, I mean, I'm not going to go to court or anything. I have to acknowledge Moko Tawariki and Malena Huaki, really two good candidates, mana whenua, who are going to do a brilliant job in the Māori space, in the Kirikiri space. I taught moko, so in a way I'm there because I taught moko, and I know Malena and her whānau, and she's a lovely wahine, a very strong Māori wahine, and I know that they're going to do a brilliant job. So no issues there, and no issues around, the good fight. The issue is around the learnings and the whole electoral process, and we need to sort this shit out, because it is bullshit. And the Electoral Commission, really, to ensure that there is proper democracy, we definitely need to bring in electronic voting. I mean, we've got my real accounts online. We do our banking online. We can get our passports online. We can do our taxes online. So we should be able to vote online, and they need to simplify it so it doesn't create the confusion that's happened. So I'm really happy with the outcome. Whānau, I'm really, really happy with the outcome, because in one sense I won, and in another sense it highlights some of the issues surrounding voting. The fact that people voted for me as mayor and left the Māori ward blank showed that my mayoral Māori ward campaign did confuse people. But it gives me comfort to know that arguably if I didn't run for mayor, that potentially I could be a sitting councillor right now. But I did choose, and I don't regret that, because I know I put some really important issues on the table, took them to the communities that need to hear it, which really are the wealthy communities, the ones that have the power and the say in Hamilton City. So, taking that debate there, I think, is important. So I don't regret it. Not only that, I'm still co-leader of New Zealand Outdoors and Freedom Party, and we still have an election to organise for next year. So, moving on, have a little rest. Won't be too much of a rest. I think our next hikoi is up north, and then our party's looking at hitting the road across the country. So, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was a full-time city councillor. So things happen for a reason, and I know that the Māori space is in a good space with Moko and Malena. So, to me, it's a win-win, and there's still a lot of mahi that I have to do. Okay, so I just needed to sort of get that off my chest. So sorry, this might be a long, bit of a long live. So I appreciate you hanging in there. And I realise I haven't been on for a while. But, now that the local government process has finished, Mum's 80th is out of the road. Dad's court case is out of the road. Oh, crikey, my husband's court case, this is Māori land stuff, right, is out of the road, and now we're waiting for judgments to come out. This is what I've been doing since Dad's passing. It's been absolutely full on. Attended a centennial last weekend, and yeah, so just trying to gather myself and be able to share with you my journey. So kia ora to Anna. Oh, what does Anna say? You still have good people, Māori, to talk with. Oh, kapai, thank you. I'm just going to quickly bring up your comments, whānau. So Titaha says, you definitely would have had my vote if I was in your rohe. Thank you. Aroa mai whaia, or kapai. So I'm just going to quickly go through. Electronic voting will be great for, absolutely, and they have to seriously look at it, what does Desiree say? I definitely be voting no confidence for next year. Look, here's the thing, we have to seriously be really, really careful, because voting no confidence is a no vote. This is how the system works, and this is why I'm going to highlight this to you. Not voting and voting no confidence actually is an automatic vote to national enact. Just think about it if you're going to use that strategy. You actually, and they want us to do that, knowing that the system, if you understand how the system is set up, they want us to not vote. They want a low turnout, because a low turnout means that the right, which is national enact, gain from that, right? So the other option is the freedom fighters space. And, there's still talks behind the scene about a coalition. Whether or not that coalition happens is another issue. And, it is what it is. It is what it is. We all agree there needs to be a coalition. However, the registered parties, I think, cannot really agree on what that looks like. And creating a model before you bring parties in is not the way. It's not the tahi. It's not the way of doing things. Everything's organic. Everything has to start from the ground up and growing, because what's really important in any relationship, be they political or private, is trust and respect. Those are the two key ingredients. You must be able to trust, and you must have respect for those individuals or individual. Anyway, but so thank you all for tuning in. I'm actually going to, and while I play, so I'm going to play Neil Oliver's little clip. It's about 20 minutes long. Then I want to talk on Dr. Hatchard. So we're getting back into the local government's done, getting back into I guess the space that we need to be in. It's about what's happened in the last 2.5 years and moving forward, right? And the shift in information, the shift in science, and where we're sitting with all of that. And I know we sort of all need to get ourselves grounded again. Well, certainly I do, because I've been in a different mental space, which is that local body space. Been good for my profile. It's been good for New Zealand Outdoors and Freedom Party's profile. Running as mayor, as endorsed by the New Zealand Outdoors and Freedom Party. They've had my back every step of the way, so I've been really fortunate. Quite excited about that space. But I'm going to now share, which I need to do now, I'm going to share Neil Oliver's video. I'm going to mute myself. Please let me know straight away if you can't hear me. Whānau, please. Okay.
Till I reached the age of 50-something before I developed trust issues, but I have them big time now. It won't be the first time we've spoken about this, I don't think. I watched, like millions of other people this week, a hearing, or a clip from a hearing in the European Parliament, and an MEP asked a director of Pfizer a straight question, to wit, had the vaccine been tested prior to rollout to see if it would stop transmission from person to person of the virus? And the answer from the director, a woman, was they didn't test it for that. That wasn't part of the requirement of the gig. It seemed, and she dismissed the notion quite unconcernedly, which is extraordinary, because that formed the basis for the whole "you must take this medical procedure, not just for you, but to protect others." If it hadn't been tested, if there was no data sought, far less obtained, about whether or not these medical products would stop the virus from spreading person to person, then there was absolutely no basis for insisting that people take it for the greater good of the wider community. That was a falsehood. That was a lie. It was arguably criminal. People were sacked in their tens of thousands from all sorts of jobs because they wouldn't take the procedure. Schools were closed. People's lives were wrecked one way or another. And all of that was done on the basis of a deliberate lie. It's not being reported. That coverage, you'll see it on social media. If you've seen it at all, that's where you've seen it. Out on the fringes of communications. The mainstream media aren't interested in reporting it because they were complicit as well. That whole grand narrative of refuseniks and granny killers and COVIDiots, people who were refusing to take the medical procedure because they didn't feel they needed it, were castigated because it wasn't about them. It was about the fact that they were supposed to be saving others. And so from the top down, Boris Johnson, Whitty, Valens, Joe Biden, the Pope, they all put out the message that taking these jabs, that it was about other people, that it was about the wider community, that it was people's moral obligation, their moral duty to take it not for themselves, but to save Granny, not to be a granny killer. And that's appalling to me. So, yet again, it got me thinking about trust. I spent the first. I'm 55 now. We've been in this parallel universe for a couple of years now. So I was about 52 or 53 when before I started thinking properly. Before I woke up, I had been lazily trusting authority and others. I trusted the government, I trusted the NHS, I trusted the police, I trusted the judiciary, because I assumed that regardless of the politics, regardless of what colour of politician was actually in 10 Downing Street, that those entities, collectively and separately, had my best interests at heart, and more importantly, the best interests of those I love, my wife and my children. And learning that they did not, that they had not, has been one of, if not the most profound realizations for me. And it gets worse as it goes on, as it turns out. That we can hear this from a Pfizer director in a forum as open, you would think, as the European Parliament, that we were effectively lied to by government and healthcare professionals. And yet all of those people stay in place, unchallenged and unrepentant, should teach us all we need to know about the abusive nature now of our relationship with our leaders. I said before that the revelation is not being generally covered in the wider mainstream press. I cast my mind back to the fact that I watched the Conservative leadership contest right up to the appointment of Liz Truss as the new Prime Minister, and I noticed all the way through that they had all been complicit on a gross breach of trust. The opposition were the same, Labour were the same. In fact, the vast majority of the elected representatives sitting in Westminster were the same. So hardly a voice, count on the fingers of one hand how many voices were raised against any of it. Next to nobody spoke up to try and stop it. None of them uttered a word of apology. Not then, not now. And we're just supposed to pretend like none of it ever happened. And that's the antithesis of any kind of a relationship, notionally or realistically based on trust. And when it comes to the media, make me particularly angry because, let's not forget that Bill Gates, the king of vaccines around the world and the principal funder of the World Health Organization, has paid over $300 million to buy control of media around the world to ensure that messages that further his various agendas get prominence in publications from the BBC through to Lancet, a supposed highbrow publication for medical professionals. And it comes down to a realization that it's about what it's always been about, which is to say control. When you get right down to it, it's about control of the basics, it's about control of energy, it's about control of food, and it's about control of money. To spread our considerations a little bit wider, I invite you to look again at what is still happening to Dutch farmers. And not only Dutch farmers, but let's just keep the spotlight on them because they kicked off first. They're being driven off their land on the pretext of a nitrogen emergency. And they're being forced off their land, they're being forced to sell their land, they're being forced to kill the herd so that the elites and governments and transnational management entities can take control of their land. And this is something that should concern us all because it's about control. It's not about nitrogen. It's about the authorities wanting to gain control of land so that they can do with it what they want, and it gives them even greater control over food creation and food distribution. And recently there's been replays of Jacinda Ardern. I talked about it last time, where she stood on her podium and said that she was to be regarded as the sole source of truth, or she and her government, or she and her nominated spokespeople were to be the sole source of truth. Now, there's no such thing as the sole source of truth. When someone tells you that they are the sole source of truth, you know you've got a problem. And they're all wriggling on the hooks of their own creation. Justin Trudeau in Canada and his weasel words now about bodily autonomy. And you watch mainstream media figures wriggle, on twist on the hook. Those that spent weeks and months going on about granny killers and refuseniks and COVIDiots and how those that wouldn't take the procedures were to be systematically excluded from normal society, pretty much trapped in their homes because of the refusal to take the medical procedures, which we now know had nothing to do with stopping transmission. And I think when trust is broken, trust is like a vase. In that, if you have a vase on the sideboard and it breaks, you can stick it back together again. You can even make a really good job of it so that you can barely see where the cracks, where the joins are. But you would never really trust it with water and flowers again. Once trust is gone, in that original, purest form that trust existed, it never comes back. You can patch it up. You can create a facsimile of the trust that went before, but everybody knows what happened, and whether it's spoken about or not, in the backs of people's minds, they know that they now live in a new version of reality. And what emotions? Anger, disappointment, but I think ultimately deep sadness that this is the situation in which we find ourselves. So late in the day, I've as I say, in my 50s, I've realised the absolute necessity. The antidote to this is to maintain. Well, part of the solution is to maintain a state of rational scepticism in relation to anything that you're told by authority figures, by anyone you don't know. You probably, realistically, you should only probably trust a handful of people in your life. Your nearest and dearest, might be worthy of that kind of trust, might be deserving of that kind of trust. But broadly speaking, governments, transnational entities, corporations, institutions of state, watch them. Watch every single move they make, and everything they say, every promise they make, take it with a pinch of salt and do your own reading and sort out for yourself what you think is actually to be believed. And I thought about the past, and even in the relatively recent past, there were limits to how much reach governments and the rest, or kings or emperors, no matter how ambitious they were as individuals, there were limits to the extent to which they could actually get into the everyday lives, far less the minds of people. Whether authority figures liked it or not, for most of history, people had to be left to get on with things. Broadly speaking, as long as they paid their taxes, seemed to obey the king's law or Caesar's law, and turned up for church or its equivalent, on the relevant days of the week, pretty much they had to be left to get on with it. And that was the reality for even the most determined, dictatorial, would-be totalitarian ruler. And I was thinking about the church. The church was very effective, but by the church I'm really talking about, what has come down to us now as the Roman Catholic Church, but which was once upon a time across Europe that was just the church. And by the application of guilt and fear of hell and damnation, and terror of living in sin and all the rest of it, there was an impressive degree of control was established over people's lives. But then, in the 16th century, came the Reformation. There had been calls for reform of the church before the Reformation actually happened, because for a long time before the Reformation, people, the general population, and representatives of the church realised that the church was guilty of all sorts of mistakes and abuses of power. Simony was a big deal. That was the selling of church offices. People were being handed the role of bishop because they parted with the relevant sum of money, and people were being sold deals to get out of purgatory and into heaven faster. You could buy these indulgences from your local travelling itinerant priest, and if you parted with some cash, he was going to promise you that you wouldn't have to be in purgatory for as long as you might otherwise have been. So there was all kind of dodgy dealing going on. And then when you got up to the higher level, the church was influencing politics, pushing for the Crusades. I mean, talk about mass formation psychosis. The decades and centuries of the Crusades were manifestations of mass formation psychosis, where populations went mad collectively and went along with things that in their saner moments they must have realised were bonkers beyond belief. But here's where it gets interesting, and where we catch one of those glimpses that we are always looking for of connections, reminders, parallels between past and present. The church, in large part, maintained control by conducting all its services in Latin, and the Bibles were in Latin. And even if you could read Latin, the Bibles were often chained to the pulpit to make sure that people weren't even tempted to take them away to have a look for themselves. They were entirely dependent on the priests to give them, to inform them of the word of God. And most people couldn't read full stop, and they certainly couldn't read Latin, and they spoke to one another in the vernacular languages. People in England, Scotland, and France, they weren't speaking to each other in Latin, and so they were at one remove from the word of God. But then, of course, in 1439 or whenever it was, Johannes Gutenberg comes up with the printing press, which makes possible for the first time the wide dissemination of material, not in Latin necessarily, but in the vernacular. So Bibles started going out into the general population. People could read the word of God for themselves, and other things, pamphlets, and revolutionary and anti-authoritarian publications from time to time could get widely disseminated for the first time. Now, what does that remind you of? That's the internet in medieval terms, giving unusually large numbers of people for the first time access to information from which hitherto they might have been excluded, or they couldn't get their hands on it. And so too many people, one way or another, learned about the church, and so that was what made the difference. It was the combination of, once again, people were questioning the authority and the legitimacy of the church, but for the first time it was backed up with information that was widely available and widely disseminated, and it was in that way that the Reformation gained the traction that it needed and made the change. And so you get the Protestant version of the faith. Well, it declared a great deal, but by the time you get to places like Britain, like England and Scotland, it was about encouraging people to think that they absolutely did not need priests. They did not need intermediaries between themselves and God. On the contrary, it was the obligation of every member of the congregation to establish their own direct personal relationship with God. That was certainly the nature of Protestantism as it manifested itself in much of Scotland, for example. Under the stewardship of people like John Knox, and John Knox also pushed for a school in every parish. Which was revolutionary thinking, because it was his intention that people, young and old, men and women, would be able to read the Bible for themselves and thereby become more godly. And so as a kind of a collateral, unintended consequence of that was, shortly, Scotland became the most literate population in Europe, because so many people had access to schools and education for the first time, and that changed everything. That meant for the centuries thereafter, increasingly there was the presence of an independently minded, self-educated or educated population that could read for itself and get its own answers to questions rather than simply being spoon-fed all the time. And the irony of the coming of the internet is that the same tool that authoritarians and technocrats want to use to control us is also their Achilles heel, because it simultaneously enables us to share amongst ourselves information that hasn't come directly from the state or other sources of authority, and that hence the frantic censorship that's going on all the time. And the technocrats and mass media and governments getting into bed with one another to try and control the flow of information, because the last thing any of these would-be totalitarians want is people having their access to unofficial information. That's why they go after comedy, because that's another aspect. But comedy's gone at the moment, because apart from anything else, authority figures tend to not like being laughed at. They don't like having their pomposity burst in front of their faces. And that's an old one. Since the beginning of time, the powerful kings, emperors, the church, faith leaders have tended to take themselves very seriously. That's why if you were in the presence of the king, you had to kneel down or lie down face first in front of him, prostrate yourself. And no laughing in church, no laughing in court, because authority knows it's vulnerable. if it's not being taken absolutely seriously. You know, there's the great line in, I think it's Richard II, Shakespeare, "For within the hollow crown that rounds the mortal temples of a king keeps death his court, and there the antic sits." The antic's the court jester, the Joker, who used to have exclusive permission to take the piss, even out of the king. And there the antic sits, scoffing his state and grinning at his pomp, allowing him a breath, a little seen to monarchize, be feared and kill with looks, comes at the last and with a little pin bores through his castle wall and farewell king. That, amongst other things, that's Shakespeare acknowledging that kings were vulnerable. They were, at the end of the day, they were just other human beings, and they were certainly vulnerable to death, but while they were alive, they were vulnerable to what people thought of them, and kings don't like that. So that's why you get all this censorship and all this, the lapse, the collapse of comedy at the moment. So what I'm saying is, in some form or another, we need another reformation, not of religion. We need a reformation of our relationship to authority, because it comes from that realization that those we have trusted are not fit to be trusted. They're not deserving of our trust. And I say again, the importance of paying attention to that Protestant argument about not needing intermediaries, not expecting to be spoon-fed every minute of every day the only important things that you're supposed to know. Remember that ethos that on the contrary, it's each of us as individuals' responsibility and obligation to seek direct communication with the truth, logos, reason, whatever you want to call it. That's what we need. We don't need these characters in between us and the truth. And we don't need to trust these people to tell us the truth, because they are not deserving of the necessary trust. Get skeptical, question everything. And remember that governments, when you get right down to it, are basically there to keep the lights on and the bins emptied. Everything else, they should get away from people and leave people to go on with their lives. And this indulgence to which they have treated themselves, that they're entitled to be inside our heads, telling us what to think, that's where we need a reformation. Our relationship with authority has become abusive, and the only remedy for anyone in an abusive relationship is to walk away and start over with a renewed sense of self-worth and self-reliance. We need a reformation of our relationship with the state.
Wow, that was brilliant. And I only watched part of it this morning, sort of getting into the flow and trying to catch up with everything. But so I just grabbed some notes for us to think about. Listening to Neil Oliver, I just thought that was brilliant. How he looked at the reformation of religion in the 14th century because of the abuse of power, the maintaining that information. When he talked about the Bible only being done in Latin, and if you control that information, then you control basically how people think and feel. And what changed all of that was the printing press, which is similar to the internet, and where they started printing the Bible out in English, and then Scotland becoming the most literate country in the UK. And they, it's because they put schools into churches. So but there's some really important things that we should garnish from what Neil Oliver has said. Knowing what we've come through, knowing what I've come through personally, I took a lot from what he had said. He said, firstly, there is no basis basis. There is a falsehood, arguably criminal, where people's lives have been wrecked because of sharing the falsehood about safe and effective, right? And what we've experienced in the last couple of years, without me even going into detail, and that those that refuse to take that juice were vilified, were ostracized, were kicked out of families. I mean, some of these private pages where people talk about not seeing their parents for over a year, not being invited to their own children's weddings. I mean, it was heartbreaking, but this is the bullshit that we've all endured, right? We've all endured. And so, and we've all endured because, JA is the one source of truth. And, she is tyrannical. She is a fascist and she needs to go. Her and her cronies need to go. So there's quite a bit of work. And like I say, if I was a local government politician, it may have taken my focus away from more important mahi. Even though at a local government level, I truly believe, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, we need to clip the wings of central government. Neil Oliver said all they're there for is to keep the lights on and the bins empty. So basically for utilities, and then get the fuck out of our lives. Sorry for swearing, whānau, but that's all they're there for. Now they're all about control. Our governments have been hijacked by elitists, by globalists, and we talk about centralising of power. I had a really good kōrero with a close friend of mine who's worked in the Ministry of Ed for 3 decades now, right? And she said, and I have no doubt it's happening in every other ministry. So, and I've worked in ministries as well. And so what you have is you have central government who lay down the policies and the rules. Then you have your regional managers, your district managers, and then your branch managers. So remember, central, regional, district, and branch. What she's told me has been happening in the last year or so is that the regional and district managers have been usurped. Their mana and their ability have been restricted. Central government has come in and is playing a huge role. So basically, central government, they've got their mitts in everything. There's so much funny that I've been keeping an eye on, and I want to talk about, even about deforestation. That's a whole nother take. About 1080, about fluoridation. There are so many areas that we need to keep an eye on things. And like Papa Pim said to me yesterday, everything happens for a reason, Donna. You're not getting into local government. He said it's comforting to know that technically you did get the votes, but because of other situations, you're not there, and you're not there for a reason. And I'm starting to feel that way. However, I do believe that local government is so important, that we need to empower our communities. I also push for community boards on Hamilton City Council. I was the only one that pushed. Oh, no, sorry, there might have been a couple of us mayoral candidates that push. He came in after me, actually. They started pushing for community boards. We need to empower our communities and disempower central government. We need to clip the wings of central government. As Neil said, they're only there to keep the lights on, give us our water, take away our sewage, and do our bins, all those sorts of things. I mean, I know local government does that. They're there as a function of society. They're not there to control us, and they're trying to control us. He says we've lost our skepticism. We need to be, we need to become skeptical. Well, I never lost that. I could have been skeptical / pessimistic, but we have to have a healthy skeptical attitude, right? And question everything. Don't accept and do not trust. Like he said, those who we trusted are not fit to have our trust. That's what he said verbatim. We need another reaffirmation in regards to central government, in regards to those in power and authority. He's absolutely right, because they have abused their power. We are now living in an abusive relationship, and they know it. They know that we know, right? And we need to stand up to we need to stand up to that. So and how Neil Oliver compared the past. So we've been here before, whānau, and it was religion. We had been here before, how they controlled us through religion. Okay, so history basically is repeating itself. The printing press freed the people, as has the internet freed the people. What they're trying to do is censor and control, and there are a number of very good pages that have been shut down. What else? So remember, rational skepticism is very good. Watch all government and transnationals and corporations. We have to watch them, be skeptical of them, and we maintain our own mana. And like he said, he used the vase as an example. When or anything, you drop a plate, drop a glass, drop a vase, you can glue it back together again, but it's never going to be the same. It's going to have cracks in it. And basically they have broken our trust. And I said earlier, and this is before I actually watched Neil Oliver, I said the two most important things in any relationship is respect and trust. Well, when the trust is gone, the respect has gone. So what does he says, like any abusive relationship, you have to get out of it. You cannot reform it, right? You have to get out of it and start again. So food for thought. Okay, that's that. Sorry if this is a long one, but there's still heaps of you on there. So you must me, or maybe I've missed the kōrero. So I'm going to now, sorry, whānau, and kei te pai, I understand if you have to jump off, and the beauty about my lives is that you can come back to them, right? So I appreciate all of you that have come on. Tiny, Tawa, Kit, Titaha, there's heaps of yous. Aria, thank you all. Ngā mihi, Trina, hands. Okay, so now I'm just going to go to Dr. Hatchett, and he read an article, and these are all, it's the same type of theme, right? The same type of theme we heard from Neil Oliver. He tells us to take a cautionary approach, to stay skeptical, to ask questions. Skepticism is healthy, whānau, and what we've done is we have lazily trusted our government. We're lazy. And even the local government elections shows how lazy we've become, because it's the lowest turnout. So our democracy, our rights and freedom have already been eroded, and we're that lazy we couldn't be bothered going out and voting for people. Maybe it's because that trust has gone, right? The trust has gone, and people have gone, we don't trust anybody, so we're not going to vote for anyone. But remember, by not voting, by not doing your research, by not going to these public meetings and asking questions, you're being lazy. And we can no longer afford to be lazy, because being lazy means we do not respect our democracy. Okay. And also, just before I go on to Dr. Hatchett, Neil Oliver talked about how complicit and compliant the media are, how they've been brought out. So we have sponsored government, sponsored media, sponsored just about everything else. And let us wake up to that, okay? Let us wake up to that. And he said it's not about health and well-being that we've been told, we've been fed. It's all about control. It's about who controls the land, who controls the creation of food. So you know, the water, right? Who controls the food and water controls the people, right? And we talked, you know, in depth about all the legislation that's going through Parliament in regards to artificial intelligence, digitalising our currency, our ID, and how dangerous all of that is. Okay. You know, with our skepticism, you know, we got to make sure we don't get pessimistic and then depressed. We don't want to become depressed. We want information to empower us, and we want to be able to stand up and push back, because that's our God-given right, whānau. Okay, so that's all of what. So I wanted Neil Oliver to lay that foundation. And now Dr. Hatchett says how selective recording of COVID data and control of Crown entities distorts public information. And it's just like, gosh, this man talks my language, because I've been talking about the distortion of the data and how the media has helped to distort that data. We look at MedSafe, and then we look at the CALM reports. Who manages CALM? As the University of Otago. Who sponsors the University of Otago? Bill Gates Foundation. So follow the money, honey, and you'll follow the science, honey. Just saying. So we've got to stop being lazy. We've got to empower ourselves, and we've got to do the research. Okay. So, and this is only a week ago, this article. He said in an article in the New Zealand Herald, flood of Noah-like proportions, the studies revealing long COVID's hidden toll in New Zealand by Jamie Morton predicts that long COVID will cast a decades-long shadow over the health and economy of the nation. Here's the thing, and I'm putting in my own disclaimer, and, you know, I'm not your one source of truth. This is my own whakaaro and mine alone. And so you go out and do your own research, but I believe that long COVID is a code word for vaccine injured. That's my whakaaro. And I will stand by that, but please, I am not your one source of truth. Go out and do your own research on that. We welcome renewed attention on assisting all those affected by the aftermath of COVID infection, but we have some questions. C, because this is where they start talking with forked tongues. We were told with the first jab, it was safe and effective. Then with the second jab, it was safe and effective. The first one didn't quite work. It ran out after so many months. Then we were told the same thing for the second jab, and that you need a third booster. Well, my story is the second jab seriously injured my father, and his third jab, or his first booster, killed him. That's my story, right? So, Dr. Hatcher says the article reports that the government is funding a raft of clinical studies to gauge the impact of the pandemic, throwing more money at creating a distorted view of the world. Okay, and so this is great. You know, Dr. Hatcher, and this is what I've said, is doing the work of ministries. He is keeping an eye on our government. He is a scientist. He is a statistician. He's worked in the health industry. You know, he's highly acclaimed. Okay, and I remember doing a little bit about him, and you know, he's got a wealth of experience and degrees coming out of, you know, he's all degreed up, all right. So he's no small fry, and governments in the past have relied on his expertise. Now they're calling him a conspiracy theorist. Crikey. You got that many degrees, you're a doctor holding a PhD, and you're still a conspiracy theorist. It's become a joke, really. Anyway, so sorry, I digress, Anor. The article reports that the government is funding a raft of clinical studies to gauge the impact of the pandemic. Each study will receive between $200,000 and $500,000. 23 government-funded studies have been listed. And if you want to know the list of who the groups are and the studies that are funded, you can go on to Dr. Hatch's. Hang on, I'll copy and paste so you can do your own reading as well. Incredibly, 14. Okay, so 14 of these funded studies focus on how to improve COVID vaccine uptake and reduce vaccine hesitancy. So 14 of those studies is about how to get that juice into us. 3 of the studies will focus on assessing the long COVID outcomes. So that's from my perspective, not Dr. Hatch's perspective, just so that we're clear, is looking at vaccine injuries. 5 studies will assess the impact of the government's pandemic response. Just 1 study will examine vaccine safety. So we've got 14 studies on how to improve vaccine uptake. We've got 3 more studies, which is 17, will focus on assessing long COVID outcomes. So that's 17. Another 5 studies will assess the impact on the government's pandemic response. So 14, 17, what's that? 17, 22. And then 1 will examine vaccine safety. So what that shows, whānau, is where the government's priority is. And the fact that my father was injured and he died from his injury is not a fucking priority to them. Sorry, my swearing is back. And I don't mean to offend, but, it just adds colour to my day. But, this is personal. This is really personal. And out of all those research and studies, only 1 is on safety. So their priority is not yours and mine, your whānau and my whānau's safety. That's how you expose them for who they are. Okay, it appears government funding is being selectively granted with the deliberate object of promoting COVID vaccination and vindicating pandemic policies. If you ignore vaccine safety, the results will be biased. So basically, in a nutshell, that's what Dr. Hatchard is saying, right? Next part, he goes on and he says how data obfuscation works in New Zealand. Let's take the case of myocarditis, a known adverse effect of the mRNA, which my father got, and it destroyed the majority of his heart. The majority of his heart was inflamed. And you've got to remember, his medical report showed he had no heart or lung diseases prior to him being vaccinated. That's his medical records. And that's how you can show that he was vaccine injured. Okay. So myocarditis, a known adverse effect of the mRNA vaccination. In the financial year ending March 2020, there were 274 hospital discharges following myocarditis. That's in 2020, March 2020. Remember, it was December 2019 when this pandemic was released into the community via Wuhan. So 274 in March 2020. In the following year, there were 343. For the next year, this is 2021 and 2022, and this is in line with the vaccine rollout and the time period where my father got injured. So sorry if it's personal, but it is personal, but it shows in real time just how it impacted on me. And you'll have your own real time if you've got whānau or even if yourself is vaccine injured, right? Corresponding to the vaccine rollout, MedSafe Safety Report number 42, and we've been following that, right? Reports 783 cases of myocarditis. Is this figure reliable? In an OIA, there were 1,540 hospital discharges in 2021 for myocarditis. So what he's exposing there is MedSafe is underreporting. And it's a lot. There's a lot happening in the MedSafe data safety report, right? There's a lot happening there. His OIA has shown that it's actually double the amount that MedSafe is saying. So I'll repeat this part again, and just so it sinks in, whānau. The MedSafe Safety Report number 42 reports 783 cases of myocarditis. Is this figure reliable? And OIA reports there were 1,540 hospital discharges in 2021 for myocarditis. So they're lying to us in their data. That's the first point. Twice the rate reported by MedSafe. Both figures are likely to be underreported. So both figures are still likely to be underreported. So the OIA doubled MedSafe, and Dr. Hedger saying it's still underreported. And my father is one of those 1,540 people. MedSafe claims that myocarditis is a rare side effect of mRNA vaccination. A safety update on its website in July 2021 and still up estimate the myocarditis rate is less than 1 per million vaccine doses. In December 2021, Ashley Bloomfield claimed the New Zealand rate was 30 per million. The reported 2021 rate is actually between 75 and 150 per million, and probably higher depending on who you believe. So again, and this is why data is so important, right? And why it should have been mandatory to capture the data. Remember, it wasn't. It was voluntary. And when it's voluntary, then data gets lost. That again shows the priority of this government, and it's not about your safety or my safety, okay? And again, Bloomfield said 1 per million, and Dr. Hatchard is saying it's reported that it's actually 75 to 150 per million, which is a distortion. That's an outright fucking lie. Sorry, whānau, crikey. I mean, my emotions, I haven't been dealing with this stuff for so long, so these emotions are raw. Please forgive me for my swearing. But that's how, that shows the lie. This exposes the lie. But he said it gets worse. A prospective study of 300 students in Thailand found 1 case of myocarditis, 2 suspected cases of pericarditis, and 4 cases of subclinical myocarditis. If you extrapolate that into a rate, it is 20 times higher than our Ministry of Health estimates. MedSafe itself has written that only 5% of adverse effects are reported. That's right, and I've said that in the past. People have said between 5 and 10% is reported to MedSafe. That's scary, right? If that is true, it would put the real rate of myocarditis 20 times higher than the reported rate, the same proportion indicated by the Thai study. So this is what I love about Dr. Hatchett, because he looks at our study and then he looks at overseas studies and then he compares data and he exposes the bullshit and the lies. Okay, prospective studies are just the sort that our government should have funded from the start, but didn't. A word of caution: don't do it now. We already have enough evidence that the mRNA COVID vaccines are very unsafe. The Thai study used a standard diagnostic test to assess the severity of the concerning cardiac systems, such as tachycardia, shortness of breath, palpitation, chest pain, reported by 29% of the participants. 7 of these participants exhibited at least one. Okay, I won't go into the detail, Fano, but you get the gist. And this report goes on for a little bit. I'll go on to the next part, which is adverse effects of COVID vaccine have been hidden. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to conclude either that information is being ignored or record keeping is haphazard at the very least. And we know that. We know that. My so when there was a media hit done on me during my local government campaign, and those media hits certainly have impacted, they interfered. Let me put it this way: the media interfered with a democratic process, which is illegal. So I'm still working on that process. So I'm not going to challenge the two that are in there. You know, they're there, they've done their mahi, they've got a lot of mahi ahead of them. What I'm going to be challenging is the interference of the media in a democratic process, in a political election, right? And watch the space, because I had several articles written on me that were derogative. And then the news hub hit 6 o'clock news, and then 2 days later my whānau got threatened with those taxes. I don't know if you've been on my page, and which put my mokopuna's life and my children's life at risk. And that was 2 days after the news hub release in 6 o'clock news. So it was huge, and to miss out by 41 votes, and then know that 73 of those votes were disallowed because of a technicality is interesting, because that would have technically I could argue that I did win a seat, but I'm not going to even go there. I just wanted to highlight some of the challenges. But where I do want to go, and there were 200 candidates that were targeted by the media, is I'm going to hold them accountable for their actions and their interference in a democratic political process, and how they have interfered with my ability to be elected. Anyway, side issue. Sorry, and I do that, don't I? I do go wee wawa. What Dr. Hatchett is saying is that the whole narrative around safe and effective vaccines have been created by bias and can be directly challenged. So there's that. So I wanted to bring this up. He goes on quite a bit. How does government control keep the public in the dark? There's a lot of stuff in here, Whānau. I've put the link up. Please go in and read it. He talks about the control of media is increasing, and I've experienced that. But so I wanted to put that there. So, Neil Oliver, now Dr. Hatchard, and he also talks about Te Pūnaha Matatini, a government-funded research body, issued papers stating that government policies were verified, labelling vaccine injury and herd immunity conspiracies. Anyway, I also wanted to talk about how, because the doctor that's going to be running that one, so out of those 23 studies, one of them is about the safety side of vaccines, and the rest are really about how to vaccinate the masses, basically, and how to stop vaccine hesitancy. Well, they can't, because the trust is gone. The public no longer trusts this government. This government has constantly lied, and this government has my father's blood on their hands. Just saying, just saying. And I need to hold them accountable. My father will not die in vain. My father will not die in vain. Anyway, so the doctor that's heading that one study up is Dr. Helen Patosis Harris. Is that how you pronounce her surname? Sorry if I got it wrong. And she was a pro-vaxxer, right? But in an interview on the 11th of October with Radio New Zealand, she backtracked on her previous overwhelming pro-vaccine advice and said enough is enough. Among the verbatim highlights of her replies, she said about the fourth booster, I wouldn't be running out to get myself boosted. I don't think it would be particularly useful. I don't see any evidence to suggest it is going to benefit me. Well, me days. You could say that about the very first one. We're into the fourth juice jabber now, right? And now she's coming out with that. So what does she say? I think that the expectations for the new benevolent vaccines exceed the evidence, probably not a lot of protection against Omicron. And saying that she is in a position to make these judgments as co-director of the Global Vaccine Data Network. She heads the only organisation that has been given unique access to New Zealand's public health data for research purposes. Is this her first comment that reflects the outcome of GVDN, which is the Global Vaccine Data Network research? In other words, does the GVDN data show that further boosters are a waste of time? So, whānau, the narrative keeps on shifting and they keep on shifting. It's like a snake with several heads, eh? One pops up, the other one comes in, another one pops up, comes down. Anyway, that's me. There's still heaps of you on, so thank you all. Please, look, make lots of comments, because why are comments important? Comments are important because, one, they show that you are interacting with me. They push me up in the algorithms. Sharing makes it go viral. And, I've been told by the media that you have a huge following and they see that as a threat. So the more followers I get your whānau to like my page, follow my page. I'm going to be doing a lot more lives now that I've got that local government thing out of my system. It was a good fight, worth it fight, but we've got even a bigger fight on our hands. Kia pai, tō rā, love talking to you. I'll read all your comments once I finish this live and we'll catch up very, very soon. Ka kite anō, kia ora rā. Keep safe.